Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2, and today you're going to learn how to PvP. At the time of me making this guide, the game's next season, titled Into the Dark, is right around the corner. And for the first time in years, we are seeing the development team deliver some sorely needed PvP improvements. This includes pages upon pages of balancing changes in an effort to rein in the metas that we've seen dominate for years. The game's 3 dark zones are undergoing changes to better facilitate PvP, including a new SHD and expertise normalized DZ to encourage even play. Anti-cheat enhancements are coming to try and curb cheating, and there are now more reasons to PvP, with DZ vendors offering named item blueprints, exotic components, prototype items, and more, all at reduced costs. So, long story short, while it has been a long time since it has been easy to recommend that anyone new try out PvP, there will have been no better time in years than this next season. So today, I'm going to walk you through PvP gameplay, build making, tips, tactics, and anything else you could hope to know. And to be clear, the objective of this guide is not to convert you into some PvP sweatlord, as I know that's not what many people even care to seek out of a PvP experience in any game. But if you're somebody who traditionally sticks to PvE, but is even the smallest bit curious about the improvements being made to PvP, if you are perhaps enticed by the updated DZ rewards and the potential farming efficiency it has to offer, or if you just want to jump into a PvP match every now and then and feel like you have even a fighting chance, this guide is 100% for you. The Division's PvP has historically not been very approachable. There are many hidden mechanics, there's lots of playstyles and build differences between it and how you engage with PvE content. So, if you'll give me the next 20 minutes, let me try and demystify things for you as best I can. Let's go. Now, before we get into the mechanics of PvP, it is important that we first identify where you should be PvPing and what implications that brings. With the changes arriving in Into the Dark, which is releasing just a couple of days after I'm posting this video, DC's Dark Zones now work on a rotation system, and that leaves you 2 different kinds of PvP-enabled DZs for you to choose between. Now, the only one that I advise you pay any mind to is this one right here. You'll see that distinct icon over whichever DZ currently has this rule set active. This is known as the Balanced Dark Zone. Any SHD levels or expertise levels that you have on your character and gear get completely disabled, meaning that the power gap between you and other players you come across purely comes down to what build you have on and what stats that gives you, and that is going to cultivate a much more fair and approachable sandbox for new, returning, and veteran players alike. It is also the only Dark Zone in the rotation that offers you a 200% yield on Dark Zone currency, meaning that farming and extracting within here will net you DZ rewards twice as fast, so win-win. Then, of course, the other PvP outlet in the game is Conflict. Conflict features the same SHD and expertise disabling rule set as the Balanced Dark Zone, so it'll be seamless for you to bring builds that you create for one right to the other. The only 2 things to note about playing within Conflict is, for one, the armor kit economy is reduced here. You begin a match with 2 armor kits instead of our usual carrying capacity of 4. Respawns will only replenish 1 of those, so it pays off to play more conservatively with them than you normally would. And then secondly, Conflict disables your radar. This means that paying closer attention to sightlines and audio cues can do a lot to give you a leg up on enemy positioning, and it makes pulsing abilities much more valuable in terms of tracking your targets. Just wanted to point those 2 things out in case you have a build that involves or revolves around either of those 2 elements. You may end up playing a bit differently in Conflict than you would in the DZ. Alright, so now that you've identified where you're going to engage in PvP, let's talk what sort of arsenal you should be taking in there. To clarify, I'm not going to be giving you specific build recommendations in this video, and that is for 2 reasons. One, the big PvP balance pass that this guide is being made in anticipation of has not dropped yet, so in good conscience I cannot recommend things that I've not tested out yet. But secondly, this video is aimed more at me giving you the tools and information to take initiative on how you engage with PvP, more so than me just telling you what to do and run. That said, if you are interested, keep an eye on this video's description. I will update it with a link to some recommended builds once the update launches, or you can subscribe and get notified when I post them. Alright, when it comes to making a PvP build, there's one thing that you need to do very first, and that is to enable the PvP normalized view for your inventory. When looking at your build, down at the bottom you should see a button for enabling PvP normalization. Click that and you should notice a faint blue layer that has now been applied over your menu pane. This indicates that PvP stats are on. What does this mean? It means that, especially after the incoming balance pass, the vast majority of weapon talents, gear sets, and exotic talents get their values and descriptions tweaked to cater to PvP balancing. Now, these secondary functions will automatically enable anytime you enter into the Dark Zone or Conflict, but you must manually toggle the stat view within your inventory if you wish to view these descriptions when you're back at the base for build tuning. So, turn that view on before sitting down to theory craft a build together, as the PvP tuning can pretty drastically alter a set or talent that you may already be accustomed to. Now, the biggest mistake that I see newcomers make when first trying out PvP is assuming that a good PvE build will translate directly into an effective PvP build. And this isn't even about differing stat values when you enter into PvP areas, but I'm talking about the fundamentals of what makes a build good in PvE versus what makes one good in PvP. In PvE, when you set out to make a build, you may ask yourself questions like, what role do I want to play? What difficulty of content is this going to be designed to handle? Things like that. When it comes to PvP, it's really just one simple question. When another player is standing in front of me about to shoot me, how am I going to take them out, and how do I stay alive while doing so? My explanation there is a bit reductive, as of course there is nuance and depth to PvP build creation, but let me give you one set of examples that can help illustrate some of the differences compared to PvE build crafting. Take the killer talent, right? In the current day PvE sandbox, this is one of the top choices for weapon DPS. You take down a red bar NPC, proc the talent, and then turn to mow down the elite standing next to him. Picture this, though. You've got Godslayer 24 barreling towards you in the DZ, and in a 1v1 scenario, Killer is going to do absolutely nothing for you. You might as well not have a weapon talent equipped at all, and in a scenario like that, that puts you at a huge disadvantage. Now, again, that's not to say that there is no scenario or no build where an on-kill talent could serve you well in PvP, but in general, you're most frequently going to see PvP players running talents, sets, or exotics that offer upfront benefits with no complicated activation steps, because it is all about immediate reliability and raw power return. Unstoppable Force would be another example. This is a somewhat commonly used backpack talent in PvE, but unless you're putting down players left, right, and center, this does just about nothing for you in PvP. An example of a more worthwhile talent then would be something like Flatline here. Flatline offers you upfront, no strings attached, amplified damage to pulse targets. So you slap on a Technician laser pointer or a scanner pulse, and all of a sudden Godslayer 24 is going to be feeling the heat while he charges at you headlong. Now, I know those few examples are minuscule compared to all of the Division 2's build offerings, but it is a principle that can be applied across the board. You have to shift your way of thinking towards what options offer me the best chances of survival when I've got that player staring me down through their crosshairs. Now, I say one final time, there is a use case for any talent or set out there that you may want to run. Take Striker, right, the top dog in PvE content. While it is significantly harder to build up 100 hits on a player opponent than it is a tanky NPC, there are ways to do it. But even in cases like that, rarely are you going to see somebody pull up to the DZ with a 6 red Striker build the way that you would typically run it in PvE, because you'll just get put down before you have any real chance to rack up DPS. It's for this reason that armor cores are much more valuable in PvP than they are in PvE, because again, it's not just about eliminating the enemy, but how do you stay alive while doing so, because most players are not just going to roll over and let you get a free kill. While we are on the subject of builds, I thought I would highlight a few key items and perks that you'll likely see pretty commonly in PvP, as I figured explaining why they get more usage here than in PvE could help further illustrate the differences in build ideology. When it comes to skills, the decoy is incredibly potent in the DZ specifically. Maybe annoyingly potent would be a better descriptor. Now, of course, this one is very popular in PvE. However, dropping a decoy in PvP removes the nameplate from above your head, as well as takes your character off of the opponent's radars, instead directing them at the position of the decoy. This makes it incredibly useful for flank attacks, sneaky retreats, or just general confusion in a firefight. The EMP Sticky Bomb is another quite potent one. You'd think it would primarily be used for, jamming skills, but no. Detonating this on a player in the radius will stagger them, regardless of their build or what resistances they have equipped. And Stagger is an incredibly powerful tool, as it is an animation lock that guarantees you around 1 to 1.5 seconds of free damage on your opponent. Switching to specializations, Firewall is one that you don't see all too often in PvE. However, I would say it is arguably the most used spec in PvP, and that entirely comes down to its armor kit, which has the ability to overheal your maximum armor and health by double over a period of 10 seconds. And so very often this is used as a steroid, if you will, to pre-pop a kit and run into a fight knowing that you have a stream of healing coming in to keep you alive through oncoming fire. So that's a little bit on builds and the philosophies behind constructing an effective PvP build. Let's say you've chosen one that you want to try out, and now you're taking your first steps into the Dark Zone or Conflict. Before we go over tips for engaging other players and partaking in PvP combat, there are some PvP specific game mechanics that I feel are very important to highlight and make you aware of, as in many cases the game actually gives you no guidance or awareness that these things even exist, but knowing of them and properly utilizing them can give you quite the edge in combat. The first is the delineation between talents that work on kill versus on down. Now, in the prior build section, I just went on a rant about how on kill talents lose a lot of their value in PvP, and quite often that is still the case. However, let's say you are using one. Take the Eagle Bear, for example, my favorite gun in the game. The talent states that you need to kill a target with a headshot to proc tenacity. However, when fighting a player, you actually just need to send them into the downed state with a headshot to trigger it. Now, it would be nice if every talent worked in the game like this. In my view, it would be the most convenient and sensible way to handle things, but unfortunately that's not always the case. Take Finisher here, for example. This will not proc just from sending a player into the down state. Instead, you need to fully kill a player who is already down in order to activate. There can also be some weird edge cases where downing a player could activate the talent, and then full killing them can refresh or extend the given buff. It's kind of weird. Overall, just be aware that different talents behave differently when it comes to player downs, and that is an important thing for you to test out before you become super attached to one particular build and ingrain your playstyle. After that, we then have the various built-in status effect counters. Now, something you'll come to learn pretty quickly if you dabble in some PvP, status effects are stupidly strong. They have been for a long time, and they will continue to be for some time more after this big balance pass goes live, as it has been communicated that they will get addressed in a separate subsequent pass down the line. But long before these current efforts to reform PvP, back in 2024, the devs tried to do something about the status meta, and that was when status effect counters were added in. Now, again, these are mechanics that only exist within the Dark Zone and Conflict, and there is zero UI or visual indicators that occur when you perform them, so quite literally, unless you know that they exist, you would be completely unaware. And while they're not going to save your life against a status build in every scenario, they do give you some small room for counterplay, and in PvP, every advantage matters. So let's just go down the list. While you're bleeding, remaining stationary grants you 10% active bleed resistance. This is ideal for breaking line of sight and then standing still to either apply an armor kit or just wait for the effect to run out. While you're burning, each performed combat roll gives you 10% burn resistance for 5 seconds, with 3 rolls or 3 stacks being the maximum you can hit. So if you're going to retreat after being set on fire, be sure to roll while you're doing it. You'll notice that shock works slightly differently in PvP. You don't have to do anything to trigger this one, but if you're used to being made completely immobile from the effect in PvE, just know that a reduced amount of movement is possible when you're shocked in PvP, so continue to strafe and wiggle as best you can to give you a better chance at surviving. Another one that you don't need to do anything to trigger, but being hit by Riot Foam, aka Ensnare, gives you 10% damage reduction for incoming body shots. So if you do get hit by foam, hold the input to break free as fast as you can and hope that the added resistance lets you live. Then when it comes to EMP, PvP has a system in place where you need to be within 3 skill tiers of an opposing player for you to disrupt their skills. So for example, my teammate here has is a 6 skill tier hive. When I shoot and detonate my EMP, which is tier 0, nothing happens. No disruption is applied. I would need to be at least tier 3 for it to have any effect. So this applies to both the EMP sticky and the jammer pulse, and it is very useful to know when crafting your build if you want to be a skilled jammer. Then, finally, and this applies to all of the game's various status effects, if a player or their skill has a status applied to you and you kill them while that status is still applied, after a short delay, it will get cleansed from you, regardless of how much duration remains. This is especially helpful with statuses like burn, which players can build to have a very long duration. When you get hit by a potent burn, your brain will likely scream at you to run, dodge, try and survive, even if the opponent is relatively low armor from prior damage dealt. And while sometimes that is the play, it has also saved my life many a time to hipfire or otherwise push through the damage, kill the user, and then the burn is gone altogether. So, you got all of those down? Probably not. That was a lot of information that I just threw at you for you to refer back to in the future. Here is a handy cheat sheet that outlines each of those 6 mechanics we just covered. Feel free to screenshot or save as desired. And finally, with each of the previous sections now covered, let's finally talk about some tips for the actual gameplay of PvP. Now, this part is always tough in a guide like this because I could throw at you very specific and very dialed in gameplay tactics that I employ or that other dedicated PvP players use to succeed, but as I alluded to earlier, just throwing information likely isn't going to do much help. PvP skill is developed over time with experience and in many ways by failing, right? Each defeat serves as a learning experience where you can analyze what went wrong and take those teachings into your next fight. Plus, we just don't all play the same, right? Playstyle can also differ greatly depending on if you plan to play as an aggressive tank, a healer, a skill build from afar. There's tons of factors. So instead, I want to lean into what I mentioned toward the beginning of the guide, which is highlighting the differences in approach to PvE versus PvP content, because much like newcomers bringing in PvE builds and expecting them to work just fine in PvP, probably the next biggest mistake I see people make when they first start out in PvP is playing the game like you would all of its other PvE content, and that very often will just not work out for you. You have to adapt and consciously change your gameplay. One very practical example that I can give of that is cover. The Division 2 is a cover-based shooter, as we all know, and cover is extremely valuable in PvP. Just not the cover you might be thinking of. In PvP, line of sight is everything. If you're within an enemy's line of sight, you're at risk. If you have line of sight on an unsuspecting enemy, that is a big opportunity to score a kill. And one of the most straightforward ways to either break or engage line of sight is whether you are bunkered into or aiming over a piece of cover. That's how PvE content works, right? Cover is safety. The majority of threats come at you head on, and cover is that protective shield between you and them. The issue with that mentality in PvP is that players do not behave like NPCs. And if your approach to PvP is to bunker into cover and remain stationary while trying to shoot at an opponent, they can flank you much faster than an NPC could. They can fire off any number of skills to damage or stagger you, which are much easier to hit if you are sitting stationary within cover, or they may very well just step side to side while damage trading with you, and very often they will win, as you as a stationary target are much easier to beam down than they are as a mobile one. What this is all getting at is that PvP necessitates that you retrain your brain not to rely on bunkered cover nearly as much. Standing behind full body cover or otherwise breaking line of sight in such a way where you remain fully in control of your character is often far more effective, given that you are positioned much better and in a much more agile way to react to whatever another player may try and do. Take this clip as an example. If I'm bunkered here and my teammate rushes me, I can deal some damage and have some options to try and counter the attack, but he has far more of an advantage over me. I'm a sitting duck and will more often than not get mowed down like one. If I'm simply standing behind cover, however, and I'm ready to pivot toward whatever attack route or diversions he may throw at me, I'm much better equipped to execute those split-second decisions and have a much greater chance at taking him down. So that's a huge one, learning to not rely on traditional bunkered cover nearly as much as you would in PvE, which I get is ironic given that the Division 2 is a cover-based game. And then the other final tip I can give you is to try as much as you can to understand the importance of situational awareness. Again, PvE content is predictable. You play the same mission on loop, spawn points remain static, you know the pace, you know which positions to take up in each room, and while the environments around you in the dark zones or on the various conflict maps will remain the same, what happens in those environments, who you're fighting, how many people you're fighting, what direction they're coming from, what kinds of builds do they have equipped, all of those factors will change each and every engagement that you have. And so one of my top tips to anyone who is ever trying to get more into PvP is simply to learn as much as you can about the surroundings as possible. This is being made far easier, at least when it comes to the DZ, given Into the Dark is introducing a PvE dark zone into rotation. So whenever you're in there farming seasonal progress, take note of your environment, learn each landmark layout, figure out where the back alleys and cut-throughs are, what rooftops are accessible, where the safe room spawn points are at, because the next time that zone rotates into being the balanced dark zone, that information is going to give you so much of an advantage, right? It's one thing to use the awareness tools that the game gives you, like seeing players' names through walls or noting when Isaac says rogue agent detected nearby. Those things are obviously important too. Please take note of them. But when you need to retreat, reposition, or push forward in such a way that you won't get gunned down, knowing what your escape routes are, what the best flanks are, and how to approach any combat situation in any PvP environment is a huge skill gap between veteran and new PvP players that I don't think nearly enough people acknowledge. Well, there you have it, everybody. That is my best attempt to get all of you watching prepared for the big PvP changes that the Division 2 has coming with Into the Dark. I said it earlier on, I know that PvP historically has been very difficult to get into. The game does not offer very many ramps for you to learn its intricacies and process. So I really hope that this guide helped out, or at the very least gave you some information for you to be able to continue your learning further. Please do let me know down in the comments if this did help out, if you still have questions potentially that you're hoping to get answers to. And yeah, I'm hopeful that with these changes coming next season, we will see the return of not only prior PvP players who left due to imbalance and just stagnation within the PvP environment, but also that we hopefully see a couple of new faces in there as well. Before I sign off, have to give a major shout out and thank you to all of our channel members. Thank you all so much for continuing to show up, support me, support the channel. It is beyond appreciated. But yeah, that is just about everything that I've got for you all today, folks. Hope to see you soon somewhere out there in the dark zone, but until then, RogueGold. Ow. Oh! We just got a Ravenous! Haha! I might not be friendly. Let's go.
Coming to the Division 2.
Let's go!
And